I'm not happy doing just probably a corporate, and I don't function well when I'm just doing that. So I realize I'm at my best when I'm doing this. So that's what matters. But to come to this phase, it has been a good roller coaster ride.
That life is too short to make long-term plans. You never know when something can come and completely change everything that you have planned for. And to be honest, that's a great learning for an entrepreneurship and an entrepreneurial career.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of our podcast series. I am Atul Nath, and with me is Suman Ghose. We are your hosts for this podcast. While our journeys over the years till now have been quite different, looking ahead, we can see our paths could be much more aligned due to similarities in what we seek. Purpose, passion, and happiness are far more important to us now. As we spoke to more and more people around us, it became amply clear that this topic resonates with most of them. In this particular podcast series, we learn from people who have made a successful transition into their second innings. Today, we have two guests with us for this particular podcast episode. First of all, Aditya Tripathi. Aditya has degrees from LSE and from IIMA Ahmedabad and has spent the first 20 years of his career as an executive in the media industry. He has worked with companies including India Today, the Outlook Group, Hindustan Times, and Discovery Networks. He has also spent some time working as an external consultant with McKinsey and Company and is currently on his second entrepreneurial venture. He lives in New Delhi with his wife, who is an accomplished musician, 3 young kids, and 5 dogs. The dogs have the majority there, clearly. Welcome to the podcast, Aditya. The second guest we have is Priyanka Mohan, who is a yakshagana artist, teacher, entrepreneur, and educationist, and has been working towards preserving local art forms for the last 10 years actively. She has trained over 1,000 students, performed 700 plus shows, directed over 200 shows in various parts of the country. Quite accomplished, I have to say. She made a shift from her engineering and corporate world career to the world of art and education about a decade ago, and has thoroughly enjoyed the roller coaster ride till now, and I'm sure she will continue to do so. She lives in the city of Bangalore with her husband Girish and her daughter Sharvi. Welcome, Priyanka. I'm looking forward to our conversation this evening. Let's start by hearing a little bit about your stories, over the years, especially your early years. I'll start with you, Priyanka. If you could just share with us maybe the early years of your upbringing, your how you enjoyed wherever it was, whichever part of the country you were kind of growing up with your parents, siblings, friends, etc., etc.
Thank you for having me over here. It's a pleasure to be a part of this. I think I've had a very fortunate upbringing, a very different and culturally rooted upbringing, I would say. So I'm born in a family of artists. My father, Mohan, he was the one who founded Yakshagana, an organization that's promoting yakshagana. And so I was born into a home where it was filled with art and artists all the time. Of course, I didn't see the value of it when I was younger, but as growing up, I really cherish it and value it much more than my formative years, I would say. Like I said, so I grew up with a lot of song, dance, drama around me, and yakshagana is a art form that's typical to coastal Karnataka. And when my father moved to the urban city of Bangalore, is when he started missing the art form. He and a couple of his friends, and that's how they got together in their younger days to bring the art form to Bangalore. And when we were young, the organization was also around a decade old, and they were trying to experiment with a lot of things. A 2 BHK house of ours would literally have 15 to 20 people every single day. That were that many number of artists. So I also have a sister who I grew up with. So that's how lively the environment was always while we were growing up. And of course, schooling, we began schooling and parallelly also started yakshagana, learning yakshagana at home. And I keep saying most of my friends who would kind of attend other classes have always had the liberty to bunk classes by saying, "Oh, I'm not well. Today my stomach is aching." But unfortunately, that time, and fortunately now, I never could give those exercises because it was right happening in the terrace of our house. And in fact, the classes of yakshagana began in Bangalore because my father wanted me and my sister to learn. And I mean, one thing is, a lot of them told him, "Why do you want your daughters to learn?" Because yakshagana is again a male art form. Very few women learn. So people told him, "Anyway, you have two daughters, and not that they will get into the art anyway in the future. So why do you want them to learn?" But very fortunately, my father saw the value of for us to learn about the art form more than. I don't think he intended us to become artists. I mean, it was a good thing if we became artists, but a lot of values and a lot of other benefits an art form provides is what he really wanted us to imbibe in our growing up years. Again, in the first 15, 20 years of my life, I was an introvert kid. I don't think my school will even recognize me today because I was this child in a corner of a classroom, not opening my mouth. And though, like I said, very fortunate because I was in the family. I was always this the substitute that is there in a cricket team. So anybody doesn't turn up for a show, then you're there, you're pushed into there is no option. So hence, I got to perform so much even before we cleared class 10. But if you would ask me if I really enjoyed it, not really, because as an introvert, it's very hard for me to express emotions, and that to being on stage. So that's how a large part of my childhood was. Of course, as life goes, class 10 was a good reason for me to come out of art and dance. So I said, I want to focus on studies, and let me take a break for a year. And I think that's also a turning point where I realized what I was missing, and I realized I was really enjoying it, but maybe was kind of not really putting my heart and soul into it without realizing I was enjoying it. And that was, and also it's like when you don't have something, you value it even more. So that was a time when I truly started coming back to art with more of my own passion and interest, not with because my parents were telling me or somebody was asking me to perform. And from then on, I also saw a lot of shift in my own personality, being able to lead a lot of things in school, college, and trying out many things, and all because of, I would attribute everything to my association with art and art form. And I completed my engineering like every South Indian kid. You're given two options: either you do a medical or a engineering. So I went for engineering. But soon into it, I mean, I realized that it's not going to be my cup of tea, but I still completed. I was doing good in college. It's not that I didn't study well or score well. I was working with Wipro, and then I realized there's the two things that are very dear to me: education and art. So I took up Teach for India fellowship. I taught in a government school in Hyderabad for 2 years, and that's also a place where I really worked on integrating art very early on in child and in curriculum, to see what is that impact that it can make early on if you introduce art forms to children. And then again, because there's always this push from the parents. Sorry, Atul, you were
Yeah,
saying?
Priyanka, if I may just interject real quick, how old were you at this stage when you were doing this Teach for India thing?
Teach for India, I was 24.
Yes.
And
Okay.
yeah, but parallelly, I also started teaching dance. So I've never left art form as such. Performing and teaching dance continued. And then after Teach for India, I took up Wells Fargo. I was in the CSR team, corporate social responsibility team in Wells Fargo. But one thing that continued was performing arts. But I think a couple of years down the line, I realized if I'm going to do something, it's going to be in art. So that's when I took a official complete break from the corporate career to really build Yakshagana and also Twarita, an organization that I'll probably talk a little bit more about, to see how can we support more and more traditional artists from different parts of the country. And that's here I am right now, just pursuing art and culture.
Excellent. That's very interesting linkage. Going from where you were to where you are today, and I mean, we are going to go much deeper into. I don't know whether to call it the process or the journey of how you kind of made these transitions in your life. But right now, I'm just going to ask Aditya to jump in and talk a little bit about his own journey and his early years and so on.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks, Priyanka, for that introduction to yourself. So, in my case, I have a brother, family of four. My father was a corporate executive who actually had a very stable, let's say, a very stable career. He worked in his entire career, entire life, in two different companies. The first company he spent 38 years, and the second he spent 30 plus years. My mother was, my brother and I saw our mother as a housewife, because she spent a lot of time with us, and she was obviously supporting us in school, and she would take us. Spend a lot of time with us after school also when we played squash and stuff. But it only kind of hit me later that she was also a national golf champion, and she represented India both as a player and later as a sports administrator. And she kind of fitted all of that in between the bringing us up. We as a family lived in many different cities, and therefore, especially in my first 7 8 years, I went to a number of different schools. Actually, not only the first 7 8 years, right throughout my schooling, I went to a number of different schools. When I was 12 and we were living in Bombay, I went to boarding school, and I spent the next 5 years at boarding school in Dehradun, and then again made another switch and moved to a boarding school in England for the last 2 years of my life. College was in England at the London School of Economics, and then I came back to India, worked a few years, then went and did my MBA in Ahmedabad. But essentially, after I came back from college in the UK, I found a job in Delhi, working with India Today, and then a few years later met Sonam, my wife, who has been born and brought up in Delhi and lived here all her life. And so we got married soon after my MBA, and since then I haven't left Delhi. I have always, let's say, worked hard, been a conscientious worker, but I've always had hobbies, and I enjoy my downtime a lot. I play squash, I play golf, I love riding a motorcycle, and I've ridden my motorcycle all over the country. And one of my hobbies was making ice cream, and I used to spend Sunday afternoons in the kitchen making ice cream. And I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more later, but eventually that has become my profession, and I currently run an ice cream company. Seeing my father as a relatively risk-averse corporate executive, I also followed a similar path for the early stages of my career. But the turning point was in 2004. Now that's a long time ago. I don't know how many people watching this will actually remember this, but there was a tsunami in Southeast Asia, and it hit Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, parts of southern India as well. Sonam and I were actually in Sri Lanka and on the beach when the tsunami happened. And cutting a long story short, we nearly drowned. But yet 3 days later, we were back home, watching TV, and the news was full of thousands and thousands of people who had lost their lives, families, homes, livelihoods. And that set off something in me, in my mind, about life being unpredictable. And so, we're going to be talking about pivots in life. I'd say all the big pivots certainly in my working life happened post that tsunami experience. From a career point of view, I started in the media industry. Was working with magazines. I worked in the newspaper company. I worked in television. I worked in cable TV, and then I did a stint of a year and a half working as an external consultant with McKinsey and Company. And when that stint finished, is when I started my entrepreneurial journey. I'm currently, as Atul said in the introduction, on my second startup, and we can speak a lot more about that. The last point I want to make is that I've had so far in my career three interesting pivots, and I'll just describe them briefly. The first is when I was working at Discovery Channel, and at that point I had been working probably 12 odd years, 12, 14 years in the media industry, but primarily in marketing. And I, at that point, felt like maybe I had done a lot of marketing and I wanted to do something different. And I got an opportunity with Discovery to do a short summer course in filmmaking. And I did that course and then came back to Discovery and started looking after their production and programming functions. So from a marketing function, I started making programs for Discovery. I was working with filmmakers. I was traveling all over with camera crews and stuff like that. So and that kind of got me onto becoming, let's say, a content expert, which then eventually led to my uh, getting invited by McKinsey to work with them on a project which was an edtech project, but leveraging my experience as a content expert and in some of the other experience I'd had with starting magazines and TV channels and setting up a couple of, let's say, corporate startups at that point. So I then moved into McKinsey, and I spent this year and a half working with McKinsey on this edtech project, which I'd say was the second big pivot in my career. Because when the edtech project finished, I was again looking for the next thing to do in my life, and I chose to build upon the learnings of that 1.5 years with McKinsey. And I know, some of you guys have probably worked with or been involved with or have friends who work with McKinsey. A year and a half at McKinsey is probably the equivalent of 5 years working in many jobs. So I gained a lot of knowledge and experience in that period, at that stint, and that led to my first entrepreneurial venture, which was an edtech uh, venture, which I then worked on for 4 or 5 years before exiting. And the final pivot, which I think we'll speak more about going forward, is what I alluded to earlier. I used to make ice cream as a hobby, and eventually converted that or transformed into setting up an ice cream company, and that's what I run right now. Like I said, we'll speak a lot more about that going forward.
Very interesting. Aditya, I mean, we've spoken many times about the kind of work you do and over the years, but even I wasn't aware of a lot of the details that you just shared. And, it's like you were saying, it's when you look back that you can kind of make the connections. Obviously, not true for the tsunami bit, because I think you probably realized that immediately soon after that was going to be a pivotal moment in your life, because it's hard for it not to be. And I of course know a little bit more details about the experience you had, and it's hair raising, to say the least. Um, what would be interesting for me to know is, your mindset, because like you mentioned, your father was in a corporate career. um, Corporate careers are not boring, staid, safe always. They have their own set of issues with them. It should never be scoffed at. But obviously, very different from being your own boss. If you could just maybe go another one or two layers under that, on how you kind of why was your mental makeup able to make that shift that you have three times over, I would say.
Yeah, so Atul, I mean, you're right. My father was not, or it was not really a boring corporate career, because within the jobs he did, one was he shifted from India to the Middle East, and even his
Wow.
first job where he stayed, 38 years in the same larger company, corporation, but he was transferred many times to different parts of the country, and he worked in different divisions. It was a multinational corporation which had, paints and explosives and fibers, exports, and also he worked in all those different areas. But yeah, really going forward, I mean, in terms of the big reason for the change, I would say a lot of it is due to that one experience on the beach in Sri Lanka. And even Priyanka mentioned a number of times in her own introduction, she used the word introverted. I was also probably, more introverted certainly than extroverted. And when we got back from that experience in Sri Lanka, for the next 1 year, I went out every night. And I remember telling my wife, Sonam, I just have to go and meet friends. I just have to meet people. And so a lot of the mindset, a lot of the personality, I would say, changed with that one experience. Now it affected different people differently. My wife Sonam, actually for the first year virtually didn't react, and then on the first anniversary of the tsunami, we were sitting at an airport going on another trip, and she saw all the newspapers and all the stories, and she just broke down in the airport, and she couldn't stop crying. So it kind of affected different people in different ways, but certainly for myself, I would say a lot of the risk taking and the chances and the even a personality transformation, I think, happened thanks to that experience.
Okay, so let's jump into the emotional side. It's all very nice to talk about all this thing rationally looking back, but when you take the jump, right, the plunge or whatever you call it, there's a lot of emotions that are going through, right, within us. So Priyanka, for you, it looks like, you were always into art, you grew up with art, but still you had a corporate, you joined the corporate world, worked for Wipro, then Wells Fargo. And then you again came out and, started pursuing your passion. So what I call moving from a cold state rationalization to a hot state. Was there a hot state? What was going through you when you actually decided to move away? Because suddenly, you'll be left without a paycheck and now you're on your own. So what was that like?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people have told me, "Oh, you're from you're from a family of artists, so it's very natural and easy for you to be in this sector." But it isn't so easy, and that's why I think it became one of a very strong reason as to why I also am dedicated the next whatever number of years to this art form, because my father also did this as a like a additional gig, I would say. He also had a bank career, and he did it this thing. And when in fact, I remember after working 2 years in Wipro as a LSI engineer, I realized this is not my cup of tea, and that's when I had also brought up saying that I would want to take up my career in art full time. And that's when huge resistance came from family also. One is they were like, this is not going to pay or pay enough for you to have a good life that we would want you to have. And again, and I would say I'm the one of the only ones in my larger cousins and everyone also, they were all doing really well. I mean, really well in terms of probably money and material things that they were acquiring. Again, parents don't want you to miss out on. So that was one whole conflict. And then being a woman again doesn't help to say that, what do you know when you get married of if that family is supportive or not? So you better continue in a job was another rationale that my parents always gave, to say that you should have a job and this is not going to pay you. And also a lot of belief that to do very well in art, again you'll have to get into a lot of alternate routes and do things that are not aligned to your value system, is a big notion that people also have. So my father is like, I'm very sure that you will not want to do any of those things. So it's very difficult for you to sustain. I've been in the field, so I know it's not easy. And so these were the rationales they kept giving me at every point. And of course, I was also scared. I didn't have that courage at that point to say, okay, I will go all out and do it, because it's an unknown and it's not easy. We've also seen a lot of artists struggle and make ends meet, and it is a very difficult journey, no doubt about it. But something inside me kept saying, no, I want to do this. So that's I never left it. Maybe I couldn't give the time as much as I would want to give it throughout. And I think in Wells Fargo, it was a time where I realized that I was very clear after a lot of reflections and a lot of internal analyzing my own thing, that in my life I want to do something in art was very clear. I'm like, why do I have to wait till I become 50, 60, and then say, now I've earned enough, now I'm going to support art. When I have the energy, when I have the, time and this thing, when I'm young is when I have to do. And that's when I took that decision. And again, my parents weren't happy. I don't think they're happy even today with my decision of doing a full-time this. But thankfully at that time, I had a husband. So they were like, if both of you are okay, then we are not getting into. So it became slightly more easier because my husband understood what I want to do, and so it was easier to convince. But I would say, as a societal thing, people still don't understand what I do. It's very difficult, so I don't even get into explaining what I want to do. And when you're in a family gathering, everybody is talking about, oh, I bought a house here, I'm going for a vacation there, and all I have to say is, oh, probably I'm performing somewhere else. And so it is a very different kind of thing. So there were times I would say that I would also feel like, have I taken a wrong step? I could also have a life of, what I want. I could save up money for my 10 years, 20 years and build whatever. But I think after very strong reflections, it took me time. It didn't happen overnight. I've also gone through that I was also young. So it's easy for me to also say that am I taking the wrong path? And I think I've reached a point where I know very clearly what are my needs, and I've realized also that I'm not happy doing just probably a corporate, and I don't function well when I'm just doing that. So I realize I'm at my best when I'm doing this, so that's what matters. But to come to this phase, it has been a good roller coaster ride, and that's why I also told in my introduction that I've enjoyed this whole process of ups and down and the continuous doubting of whether I'm capable of doing what I want to do is also there. And this also, I think, goes back to having also an overachieving sibling in my older years. So I was not great at dance when I was young. So everybody looked up to my sister going to become a really big artist because she was the prodigy. She had it in her. For me, it's more of I've developed over time, and I've seen that transition. So then people are also like, if it was your sister doing it, we would be a lot more confident, but you doing it, I'm not very sure, was again not helping my confidence at that point.
No, just quickly going back, Priyanka, you and the point about cold state versus hot state that Suman talks about is very much related to emotions, both in terms of emotions that make you question yourself, but also emotions that drive you. And you were talking a little while back, and I found that I always find that a very key pivotal emotional state of when people ask me what I do and what I say, because that's all about identity and about a self-image. And that becomes a very important, and corporate careers, if nothing else, give you a great self-image and identity. If you say I work at Wells Fargo, there is not much more you need to say beyond that. Already you are slotted into something. If you are an external consultant at McKinsey and Company, you really don't have to say anything. You have been slotted, right? It's a good identity mechanism. So is that something that also drove you, being able to say that this is what I do now, this is my self-expression as an artist? Or was it something that always made you kind of, become slightly defensive that, this is my identity?
Yeah, I think I love this question because a great part of my journey, I would say, in the last 14 years of whatever work out of college time that I've had, it was, I mean, I would just hide the fact that I'm also doing this and I'm doing this because then, that like exactly what you said, I have to defend so much more as to why I'm doing and all those, and I didn't want to get it. So for me, Wipro, Teach for India, Wells Fargo became a great shield to avoid any more further questioning. And also, another thing is when you're doing art along with a corporate career, then it's seen also, oh, you have something to pay your bills and you're doing this as a passion.
And then you're seen
But
as multi-dimensional. In fact, it's really cool.
yeah, yeah. So a lot of people still view me as, oh, how do you do so many things and this thing. But what people don't understand is that there is and this is exactly, I think, when I quit Wells Fargo and I was doing this full time. It was new for me also, and people just thought I'm a housewife then, and I'm just doing this as a side gig. But like I was telling everyone, I have in that 1 year of quitting Wells Fargo and establishing, I worked probably 10 times more than what I was doing in Wells Fargo or anywhere else because it's your baby. So you have sleepless nights and days too. So again, I think explaining that is very difficult, and that's why today, when we are talking about building a platform for artists and everything, it ultimately comes to people asking me, "Are you teaching children or are you performing?" So then I ended there because I don't want to get into then defending myself, saying why I'm doing all of this.
When you first introduced yourself, saying, about your journey, I was just wondering, what is this roller coaster ride that we talked about in your introduction? So now, when you talked about, just now when you explained as to what you had to go through, I kind of understand that better. When you want to pursue a passion, but everybody around you, including your parents, is against that, advise you against that. I think it takes a lot to actually take the plunge, and that's what I mean by the hot state. Okay,
And
great.
especially Suman, given her father's position in that space, he
Yeah,
comes from not only as a father but as
right.
someone who's got so much knowledge in that space, coming from a position of such authority, would
Yeah,
would have been really really difficult.
exactly. So it takes, I think, that much more conviction. Great. Let me come to you, Aditya. For you, you've had a long, successful corporate career, and then you also did a project, you said, with McKinsey, but at some point you had to take the plunge, right? And then this is your second venture, so obviously the two are very different. One was a ed tech venture, and now it's an ice cream venture. But when you first did took that plunge, when you really had to move away from the paycheck, what was it like? What were the emotions that were going through you?
So, to be honest, Suman, I did this project, like I told you, with McKinsey, and it was it was always understood that the project was a time limited project, and eventually it finished it took about, we worked about 18 months on that project. And once the project was over, then I was without any full time employment and trying to figure out what to do next. So I think the decision was easier than it might look on paper. I had to decide what to do next, and the options were to either go back, look for a job, do the whole interview process, or like I said earlier, leverage all the knowledge, newfound knowledge I'd say that I gained on the project about e-learning, about education, about the technology behind it, and really take that forward, set up a company and take that forward. And I did find someone who was willing to invest in the idea. It took me a while to find that person, and so I went on with that. It was really the first option that came to me.
You talked about the tsunami thing with being a turning point. Did that have a role to play in you actually moving away from the corporate world?
Yeah, so definitely it did. It I would say corporate world, but it kind of the first thought. in my head that came a few days after the tsunami when we actually got home and we were having dinner at home. We were watching the TV news, and there was every day or literally every few hours the death toll was going up and the stories were coming through, and it just got me thinking about what is it that has allowed my wife and I to get back home
Hmm.
with just a few bruises. I had a stiff neck, there was a little scratch, a little bruising, but yet hundreds of thousands of people have been much, much more affected. And it just kind of, set something off in my head that life is too short to make long-term plans. You never know when something can come and completely change everything that you have planned for. And to be honest, that's a great learning for an entrepreneurship and an entrepreneurial career. But yeah, that was really the time. I mean, like today in my head, I don't think I had a tsunami that this experience. But in my head continues the thought that life is too short to make long-term plans for.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a great learning for all of us. What is also kind of um, standing out for me is that I know people. I mean, I've personally gone through experiences like that, which are kind of turning points. I know a friend who's gone through that, but it hasn't impacted him in the way that probably it's impacted you, right? So a lot of it comes back to reflecting and drawing lessons from that. Whatever has happened. I think that's key, isn't it?
Or it's
Great.
simply a case, Suman, of something latent being there and something just
Yeah.
fires that, triggers that,
Correct.
and which is why it happens for some people and doesn't happen for some people. And I think that's the way a friend of mine used to always say to me that the long term is simply a series of short terms put together. And if you can kind of look at it like that, especially as an entrepreneur, you have a long term vision, and that's all great. But in the long term, we're all dead. So you just have to go with these little short terms and just make sure you keep making the corner every. Yeah, this is very interestingly connected with the cold state and hot state bit as well. That we've spoken to quite a lot of people, and different people have different ways of dealing with the financial preparation piece. Some people love spreadsheets, need to put together, that the amount of money you need to take care of yourself at a particular life style, and so on and so forth, and you start planning that. That's one way to do it. A lot of other people, some people just take the plunge. We've had people just tell us that I just felt like doing it, so I decided to do it. In the case of Aditya, for example, as he was just sharing with us, that he came to a stage where he had two tracks in front of him, one to go back and look for a job, and one to start a venture, and he just decided that starting a venture made sense. So I'd like to kind of talk to both of you to kind of understand, did a lot of financial prep go into taking the plunge for you? The important bit here is that, is there any tips you'd like to share with people who are thinking about it, sitting on the fence, on what worked for you?
I'm going to go back to when I was in college, and I was doing an economics degree. And within a couple of, I mean, it was obviously a 3-year degree, but very soon into that degree, I realized that economics was far too theoretical for my mindset, because particularly the economics theory was all based on a large set of assumptions that almost never held true. And you know, in my career, whether it's been working for someone else, working for myself, I'm sure everybody here knows that the even the finest Excel sheet that has taken the longest time to build uh, rarely actually uh, eventually emerges with the same numbers. And so, in my case, there was not a whole lot of financial planning and involved. I do have to say that I have had the I have the fortune of being relatively financially stable. I have a home to live in, and with the support of the family and my wife, we will hopefully never go hungry. So I always knew, and I always know at the back of my head that that is something that I can fall back on. When I mean, in fact, Priyanka, my wife's journey has been very similar to yours. She started as an advertising professional, and at some point quit to learn to be a musician. In her
By
case,
the way, I have every intention of having her on the podcast as well,
yeah, yeah,
a couple of
she'll be a
episodes down,
yeah,
for
she'll be
sure.
a great person to be on that. But in her case, it was me who was telling her, listen, your talent with singing is something special, and you should quit your job and go ahead and do it. And at that point, I had a stable job, and I said, you go ahead and do it, take your chances. And fortunately, she is now at a place where she makes enough money to keep the household going, even if I am not able to do that at some point, or if that ever happens. So again, certainly to answer your question in one sentence, in my case, there was no detailed planning involved. I just took the plunge.
I
Yeah.
think for me it was a bit of both. And I'll explain why I say a little bit of preparation and taking the plunge happened. Um, I would say I think COVID didn't help at all, and one of the big roller coaster ride was also during the pandemic, where art and culture had just I'd taken 1 year. It was 1 year after I quit Wells Fargo to get into art full time. So 1 year of your prototyping, you're testing your idea, you're trying to figure what is it, and again I was going beyond what my father's organization was already doing. I mean, if it was that, then it was running in a certain way, I could continue to run it, but my idea was to also see how can we include other art forms, and also integrate it in education at that point, to say, because my background was in education and this thing. And March 2020, the lockdown happened, and then from there on, it literally took 2 years for art and artists to come back to what they were earning, and which means it included me as well. And at the same time, I also got into motherhood, so it was double the pressure. So to say that. You know but some confidence in me kept saying that keep going when you have the talent. I was taking class, and my needs are also very minimal. I mean, very minimalistic way of living. So I thought, with whatever I earn, I'll be able to do. And like Aditya also mentioned, very fortunate to have a roof under me. 3 times a meal will never be a problem. So it's only when your desires are also a little beyond those basic minimum things, it becomes a struggle. So that was one definite thing. And also why it took me a certain period of time to jump into this full time was, again, because financial stability being one of the main reasons. Saying, everybody around me kept saying art is not something that will pay you well, so that was definitely scaring me. And at that point, I was dating my husband, and he was preparing for UPSA. So both of us, I was like, both of us can't afford to be chasing our passion. So one of us though will have to have some stable job. And again, it was difficult to convince my parents. He was still preparing when I married him, to say, you're marrying a person without a job. What will happen if it doesn't clear? What's the thing? So, but thankfully, both of us were not like, oh, we have to think, what do we have to. We were not thinking too long term. Like Atul said, we were just saying, what is that short term thing that we'll have to manage? That much was there. And before quitting Wells Fargo, I knew for 6 months I'll be able to sustain, even if I earn zero rupees. And I didn't want to go back to my parents or husband to ask for any money. And then also I feel once you get into this, you also get creative when your pockets are empty. So started thinking of different ways to say, how can I use, I know what are my skills. I know I'm good at curating art. I'm good at applying traditional art to this. So then started taking up more of opportunities that traditionally I wouldn't take otherwise. I knew, so for example, I would say, designing a session for a corporate using Yakshagana was something I took a plunge, otherwise, I would never do.
Wow.
Session on a leadership using Yakshagana. I really was not earning anything, so somebody approached me. I said, I'll do it. I wouldn't have done
Hmm.
it. Publishing a book on Yakshagana, again, something that I said, let me go for it, and then things fell in place. So I would say, I mean, it was a great opportunity. I tried a lot of things when I thought this could become a good source of income. So it really helped me get more creative. And but COVID was a time when I realized that I can also not keep running foolishly saying I will jump into it and I will see it. It is very important to also be very mindful about your financials, because 2 years of almost zero income, and again you have artists who depend on you, and they are at a stage where probably three times a meal is also very difficult if they don't earn
Yeah.
that month. And figuring out what is that we can do became a priority at that point for me, because like I said, for me basic needs were met. So that was again a turning point to then go beyond what I was thinking, to say art and education, and being it seen as a like a social sector thing. Then now we've moved on to say how can we make art very lucrative so that more youngsters will aspire to become artists, traditional art forms. And two is again. My like what my parents told me. Nobody should tell a younger artist saying that do an engineering degree while you have a talent, because you can earn more. And that's also the value that our art forms also have. So that's also helped me flip the way we work as well.
And that's what happens with entrepreneurial journeys, that it goes beyond personal financial dependence. You inevitably have other people depending on you, and that starts forming a very important part of obviously your decision making, but also your emotional makeup. That there's nothing quite like 2, 5, 10, 20, 50 people who are looking at you for direction, and their lives depend on you. And I think what's related to this financial preparation question, but I'm going to take it to the next step. And I started my entrepreneurial career very, very early, straight out of business school. And so I've never had a corporate career, and I really don't know what switching lanes in that sense kind of means. But even in the early years, because I was relatively well educated, I had the backup plan that if my business doesn't work, if my entrepreneurial journey doesn't take off, I can do something else. But and the thing that was always there in my head was this financial thing, right? That how much is enough, right? If I'm at that time, frankly, it used to be, if I'm losing this much, then it's okay, right? In the early years, it's really about how much you're losing, not how much you're making. So I just wanted to ask you guys that, do you have some sense of financial thought process on, maybe not month on month, but maybe quarter on quarter or annually, that if it comes down below this level, then I need to start thinking about going back to a corporate career? So how does the financial planning kind of go? Of one side is the business part, one side is your work part, that it should be doing this much, but at a personal level, how does that kind of work for you?
So Atul, I think certainly in my case, as and all of us on this speaking here today would know that the style of functioning as an entrepreneur is very different from working in a corporate career. And certainly in my case, it's been a long, long time since I worked in a corporate job. I don't think that's an option for me anymore. Going back, to the working hours, not working hours, but the working conditions, the reporting structures, all of those things, I don't think work for me. So it's going to be, it's entrepreneur or nothing for me now.
So I get reminded of this quote Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. Um, So especially when you take the plunge, right? So Aditya, maybe for you, so you talked of once you moved, to your own, you took the plunge and started doing things on your own. Did you face a few punches? What was that like? Was it a lot of, what was the learning like? Was there some unlearning also involved?
Oh gosh, punches. I mean, I get punched several times a day, even now, Suman. So the punches never stop. Uh, it's Priyanka said the words roller coaster ride. It is truly a roller coaster ride. And you have to take tough decisions almost every few days or every few weeks, or not tough decisions necessarily, but decisions that uh, are risky, different levels of risk, different impact. But you have to take decision because I'm doing something that I've never done before. I'm in the F&B industry. I have no experience of F&B. I really did this because I was making ice cream as a hobby, and friends of mine, started saying, "Listen, your ice cream is really tasty. You should do something more with it." Now, of course, I have a co-founder who has a lot of experience in F&B, but he's not involved to the level that I am. I use him more as a bouncing board and as a guide in the business. So yeah, I mean, punches come. You have to, roll with the punches. In some cases, you're able to fight back and give a harder punch back. In some cases, you have to recover and figure out a solution and get back up on your feet.
Since you talked of a co-founder, how was that like? Because a lot of people who are fence sitters who are planning to do something often are wondering, should they strike out on their own, or should they first get a co-founder or co-founders? Uh, what would be your advice to them?
So in both my entrepreneurial ventures, the primary founder and the primary responsibility for the business has been with me.
Okay.
And of course that gives you a lot of flexibility, and also it's it's easier to take decisions, I say, in one way, because I'm the chief decision maker. Of course I have a support team, and I have people, but eventually the buck stops with me. If I ever was to do another venture, I would try and find someone who has equal skin in the game. But that's just my personal point of view. I think it always helps to have a bouncing board who has as much to gain or lose as you do on every decision you take.
Great. So Priyanka, I don't know how whether the punch in the face is relevant for you. A couple of things that I know is that I met you at that performance the other day, Yakshagana performance at BIC. It was a wonderful performance. I also know that amongst all our speakers on this show, I think I had to chase you the most to get you on the show, because any time and date I would mention, you'd say I'm busy doing a performance. So obviously, you're keeping yourself very busy, which is great. But anything you would like to share in terms of learning, unlearning, something that you didn't expect when you started out on your own?
Yeah, there are a few, and of course, like Aditya mentioned, these punches. I think it's day in day out, and the I think the magnitude of it just differs. I mean, something that has really made a huge impact for me, like a big blow, was again during COVID, March 2020, when the lockdown happened. We were also getting a grant from central government, and it got stopped at the same very month. So at least we were hoping that if not through performances, the grant will be able to pay our artists. And unfortunately, we also had to let go of our artists to say we don't know where else to get money from. And that too, the reason that was stated saying that you're not doing enough. And whereas that year was the year I toiled to do so much more and got so much more. And of course sometimes you can't question certain decisions, especially in the government. How much ever you justify, there's a Facebook, there's a social media, some decisions are made and you have to move on for various other reasons. That was really, and that was a time when people were also pinning hope on me, saying, "Oh, my father has done enough. Now he's taken a backseat. She's taking over." And then the first year into it, the big punch on that confidence levels in the artist also came. like down, and that also affected me. To say, it took me a couple of years to come out of it, to say that no, I'm going to find better. I'll also see how to holistically drive the organization. But this was one thing that really stood. And then a lot of smaller things. Again, I keep saying this. One is just being a woman, you have to do more to also establish your credibility, unfortunately. So I was doing more, and then I was also a teacher for the first time, a woman teaching this art form. So a lot of people were questioning credibility. Just to establish myself as an independent identity was very difficult, and I had to unlearn certain things in that process to also, there are certain mindsets I'm also operating from, and hence that limitations come. That was again a very difficult time to for people to accept that she is an independent artist, not just under her father's guidance. That she still, of course, he's helped me start off at a very different point, but whatever from there on, it's very independently done. But that to reach people, I don't know if it's reached also. I had to put up 4 5 productions, and then people watched it, then they were convinced, yes, she has something in her. But I see, for a male counterpart, they probably one production, they would establish their credibility as a teacher. So that was again, took a lot of unlearning from my end to be open, take this as a more not get bogged down, and take a couple of months to come back and bounce back. But to how do I not let all of these affect me mentally, so that I'm still focused on what I want to get, was something that this whole journey in the last couple of years has helped me gain.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about passion and purpose. There's a lot of talk about passion and purpose. Find your passion, follow your dream, all of that. Um, so let me come to you, Aditya. So you've had two ventures, and they're both in very different spaces, right? Um, so what would you say would be your passion? If somebody asks you what is your passion or purpose, what would that be?
I mean, I honestly don't think passion or purpose. I don't know how big a part that played. In the first case, when I was setting up the edtech venture, it was
Mm-hmm.
something that I felt I knew a lot about. It was
Okay.
something that I had really enjoyed, and yes,
Mm.
certainly I thought that it was something that I could, do something. I mean, like create a very interesting product with.
Mm.
My first thought was making a really good e-learning product, and then monetizing it came second. In case of my ice cream venture, it's been more interesting because it was, like I said, purely a hobby for me. I have
Mm.
childhood memories of having made ice cream at home with the family. We had one of those ice cream buckets that you put ice in and you turned it around, and all the family took turns to, churn the ice cream. And then when I started making ice cream for my as a hobby, it was really initially just for myself,
Mm.
and I just enjoyed it, and I would experiment with new flavors and with new ingredients. And only when friends of mine started telling me that the ice cream was really good, I took baby steps. I first started doing a few events. I started then taking orders for just from friends and family. Then set up a little Zomato outlet out of my own home and out of the home kitchen. But so clearly it was. I mean, and everyone still says it was a hobby that turned into a profession. But the
Mm.
fact of the matter is that as the business scaled up, my role changed very drastically, and I have not been in the kitchen now for 3 years. You know, I still, of course, one of the best parts of the job is to taste the ice cream that is being made there. But I have a set of professional chefs now who also know much more about making ice cream than I do. I was making it, from YouTube videos. These guys actually now, the people in the kitchen actually have the know the science behind the food. So, it's still, you could say ice cream may be a passion, but I don't make the ice cream anymore.
Yeah, scaling up is a totally different ballgame from doing the first bit. I'm going to talk about something that's just struck me, Aditya, and this is very much related to the purpose passion bit, though you're not really defining making ice cream as your passion. But one always hears about the thing that if you're trying to create something, and if it doesn't embarrass you, then it's too late. The first few events that you did with the ice cream, I'm sure you would have been jittery, right? When you go out there with something that you were really making in your kitchen and suddenly you're putting it out there for not just your friends, so you can manage as they don't like it, or if it doesn't go right, it's okay, they're friends. But to the public at large, strangers, people you don't know, that there would be a certain amount of jitteriness, and I'm sure I'm going to come to you as well, Priyanka. In performance it must be even more so, because it's live feedback, right? You're on stage and people are either appreciating it or not appreciating it. Could be terribly embarrassing if they're not. So I mean, that's a difficult emotion, something that is you see as a reflection of you as a human being, and you're putting yourself out there. And that's something that I think stops a lot of people from jumping over the fence. That's what makes people sit on the fence and boss, I'm not interested in letting people take pot shots at me, and tell me that me is a problem. So we just want to talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that is very, very, very correct. But the flip side of that, Atul, is the satisfaction and joy that you get from people who love what you do. And in my case, of course, I'm certainly the most popular father amongst all my children's friends, because there's ice cream, there's freezers full of ice cream at home. But getting, messages, getting phone calls, getting reviews on Zomato or on the website saying fantastic product is so satisfying. Both at a product level and then at a brand building level. When people recognize what you do, they know your brand, they've eaten it somewhere. It makes up for all the unhappiness of people, not liking what you do. And just quickly, when I started getting formal Zomato ratings, and every time I got a low rating or I got a customer complaint, it would hurt me so much that and my co-founder would sit down and say, listen, you can't take this to heart, because for every 1-star rating you're getting 3 5-star ratings. And we're every outlet of mine on Zomato now we have 4.3 or more, and I learned that I make at any one point in time, or if you go to one of my outlets, you can choose from 20 flavors. Not everyone is going to love each of those flavors. But someone will find something that they like. So even if I get a message saying, hey, I had this particular flavor and I didn't like it, I now write back to them and say, listen, I'm not going to give up on you. Send me your address and I will send you 4 free flavors which are very different, and I'm sure you'll love one.
Yeah, that's the advantage of flavors.
Yeah.
Priyanka?
I love ice cream, but I have not tasted cold.
Are you available in Bangalore, by the way, Aditya? Yet no, because Suman and Priyanka both are in Bangalore.
Yeah, you guys live in the wrong city, I'm afraid.
No, I already checked that. I went to the website, went down and said available only in New Delhi. Yeah.
Unfortunately not. We're hoping to come there soon, but we're not
Super.
there yet. Yeah.
But next time you're in Delhi, ice cream's on me, Suman and Priyanka.
Fantastic.
Because Cold Love is really, really good ice cream, and I'm not just saying it because Aditya's on this call. I've tried maybe a dozen of his flavors, all kinds of different ones, and we often order it at home. He doesn't even know we order it, and we just love Cold Love. It's just amazing.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, Priyanka, please.
Amazing. I think another incentive for me to come to Delhi. I think passion, I echo what Aditya said, passion keeps changing for me also. But one is, it's all in the field of art. But again, as you go, a lot of people, I keep telling people, I get at least 20 calls every week saying, I want to learn yakshagana, I want to do this in art, I'm very passionate. And there's only one task I give them. I say, come to our studio on Saturday, 5 o'clock. And out of 20, most weeks, 0 people turn up. So again, a lot of people just talk about passion, and that's not, I mean, that's what also differentiate probably an entrepreneur, to say that he or she is also putting an action to that passion towards ensuring there is a larger purpose that is served through this. That's what kind of misses a lot of times. And you're in this. I mean, I've also had this bit of rosy image of, I'll run my own organization, nobody to ask to, and you realize there are 100 more people who you are accountable for than just being accountable for your manager in a corporate world. So that's again some of the rosy things that you also have. Passion and purpose also, for me, it's changed over a period of time. I think at one point I was not even passionate about art forms, to today being so being like a champion talking about art and saying people to be a part of art. It has differently, I think, has taken many routes. And I would say, for me, purpose is very clear now. And again, it's taken time to get to what it is, to ensure livelihood of artists, being really like art being a viable career option is the larger purpose I'm working towards. And that also came from like a very strong experience I had with an artist who is a brilliant artist. And I asked him, what are your children doing? Are they also learning an artist? And he's some second generation artist. He said, I'm not going to, I mean, I've not trained my children in this art form because I don't want him or her to go through what I've gone through. And that was a point, and I keep coming back to that. Anything for me, that is my thing. Will he take a decision very differently by me doing it? Has been like my anchor so far. So I would say, again, that's what drives me every single day. And I work with a lot of youngsters and youth. Again, when I talk to so many of them, art is definitely a hobby, but nobody will say, I want to do this full time. And the day that changes, I think I cease to exist. So that's how I see my passion.
Excellent. Okay, so Atul, anything else before we get to the rapid fire round?
Not really. I think it's the bit about, and we can go deeper into the questions you're about to ask them. We can talk about those a little bit more because those are interesting as well.
Okay. So again, rapid fire. If you had to do this all over again, what would you do differently, and what would you do the same? Maybe we'll start with Aditya. Okay.
Yeah, Suman, I think it's hard to say whether you would have done anything differently, because in the heat of the moment you do things and you make decisions that you feel are the best at that particular time, and hindsight tends to simplify things. So I would probably do the same things all over again.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Aditya. Priyanka?
Yeah, I think there is every junction. It's given me, I mean, I might have worked in different sectors, but it's contributed a lot to my art form Twarita and shaping yakshagana as well. So I wouldn't want to not go through that whole process. But if I were to change something, I would believe more in myself very early on. It's taken me, a decade to believe in myself and put my best foot forward more confidently. That's what I'm going to change if I have to redo.
It's so interesting you say that, because this has been the same response from a lot of our other participants as well. Saying that, because I'm new, I'm trying it, I'm a little shaky myself, but, I'm not valuing myself. And I wished I'd valued myself more. Yeah. Excellent. So any advice you would like to give for somebody who wants to pivot, do something different?
Who's sitting on the fence, maybe.
Sitting on the fence. Yeah. And this sitting on the fence is a big one. That's why I keep talking about the hot state and cold state, right? I mean, this Excel sounds like a very tactical thing, but Excel could be an enabler, but there are people who are looking at the Excel and rationalizing to themselves as to why they can't take the plunge, right? Because Excel is not allowing them, isn't it? So it can work both ways, isn't it? So what advice you have for somebody else who's planning to do something? Go
I
ahead.
would say take the plunge. Of course, there are certain like basic needs that needs to be taken care of. All of that is met. Then I would definitely say don't get into overthinking, over calculating. You never know what takes you where. I think 7 years before, if I had spoken, I would have never thought of the 10 different innovations that we could do in yakshagana itself. That came because I took the plunge, and you can't predict what it is as long as you go with the flow and be a little logical about it, which I'm sure most people would be. I think overthinking just spoils the whole fun for you. It's again going back to roller coaster. You're sitting in it, you enjoy the ride. Don't think of, oh, will the buckle unlock and I will fall off. It mostly wouldn't happen. It's only rare cases it happens.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
so
like the
in
roller
my
coaster
case,
metaphor.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I just like the roller coaster thing. Go ahead, Aditya.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, advice, if you're going to do, now obviously everybody is different, but if you're going to be doing something, trying something different, apart from thinking through the business plan, thinking through the practical issues and aspects of the idea, think about the emotions you're likely to go through. There's uncertainty, there'll be ups and downs, there'll be financial sacrifices, there'll be external pressures, and ensure that you are able to commit 100% to what you're doing. And only once you're sure you can commit 100% is when you should take that plunge.
One of the things, Aditya, that someone else was talking to us about a couple of weeks back was that, from a time period point of view, also, you need to be committed. You say, oh, I'll give it a chance for 3 months, 6 months. The reality is, it doesn't happen that fast. It takes time, right? So you have to not only commit 100%, like you're saying, but also be in it for the medium to long haul. I wouldn't say only the long haul, but definitely there has to be a sustained effort. It's going to take time. These things, it's not just something happens quickly for some people as well. There are those lucky people, but 99 out of 100 cases will take time. You'll probably pivot from here to there. You'll try this, you'll try that. And like Priyanka was saying that, necessity is very often the mother of invention. You come up with new things to do, new different directions to go in, and so on and so forth. So I think that longevity and commitment, mental, emotional commitment, is a very important aspect of making this work. So, anything else? Anything additional? Otherwise, we can kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, no, I think we are good. It's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you. Nothing else from my side, Atul.
Okay, excellent. Just yet again want to thank both of you, Priyanka and Aditya. Thank you so much for giving us time on a day like this in the evening. It was both of you. Your journeys are so different and yet so similar in terms of the emotions involved and the way you've kind of approached it. And we really appreciate your sharing that. Sharing this kind of a journey is not only a matter of talking about your experiences, but requires a certain amount of vulnerability. These are very personal, stories and emotions, and we really appreciate your willingness to put yourself out there, not only through your journeys and your careers, but also through sharing them subsequently. So thanks a lot, and we will come back to you over a period of time to share our other stories and experiences with you, and we'd love to, reflect upon that at some stage. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.